like to speak, just get with Hillary. All righty, let's see here. Pam Lowry. Hey, Pam. How are you? Well, fine, if you would, just for the minutes, if you would state your name and your address.
My name is Pam Lowry, and I live at 389 Fairway 11. From October through this week, I have sent numerous emails to town officials about the continuous, dangerous public safety concern at the end of the street I live on and its intersection with Green Hill Road. Before that time, my husband Ken spoke with the town manager, the police chief, and the operations manager. We have requested a three-way stop to be put at Fairway 11 and Green Hill Road. That would include 2 forewarning signs because, you know, it takes us a while to realize they're stop signs. So we would need a total of 5 signs. From Fairway 11, if you turn in either direction, it's extremely dangerous. You have to live on our street to know that. You pull up, and on the left, there is a curve, and there are huge boulders. On the right, there is a curve. So if you're turning right or left, it's very difficult. I began working on this myself on October the 14th. Over the summer, I had several near misses, but on October the 14th, this little cream-colored VW Bug came flying around the corner from the Parkway side, and I had pulled out. They have built a new house directly across from Fairway 11. Those people have put their fence and their mailbox up close to the road. So when something like that happens, you no longer can swerve quickly to get out of the way. Both of us slammed on brakes. She skidded and I skidded. And because of the construction of the road, we were very lucky we did not crash. After I had written a number of emails, DOT did a traffic study. They did the traffic study from September to November. That is not when we have all the people in Blowing Rock. In my opinion, the traffic study is flawed because it was done in the off-season. The speeding exists daily. People do slow down when those standalone monitors are out there. What I'd like to ask is that, according to the DOT, there have been no accidents, according to the DOT and to our local officials. So I've come in front of the council saying, can we be proactive instead of reactive? The fog, rain, snow, and ice remain constant. The village is growing by leaps and bounds. People use Green Hill as a cut-through, and I'm talking about the entire Green Hill, in my opinion, is a safety issue. They use Green Hill as a cut-through, and in the summer and fall, there are more motorcycles and bicycles out there than you can imagine. So, 8 new houses are being built on Green Hill toward the Parkway. 2 more are going to be, one's almost finished, and another one is to be built down toward the Parkway. That's 10 houses that are going to feed into already busy Green Hill Road. Service trucks add to the mix, especially in the summer season. The road is curvy. It has those deep side ditches, all in different places, and that new house I mentioned across from Fairway 11 has added to the problem.
Pam, you're going to have to.
I'm almost done.
Thank you.
I spoke with the mayor. He suggested we get a petition, and we're going to do that. And I really appreciated him telling me that, though most of my neighbors have emailed you. I think you've gotten emails from a lot of our neighbors. So I'm asking tonight, guys, why not? Why can't we have a 3-way stop sign with 2 forewarning signs at Green Hill and Fairway 11? I appreciate your time.
Thank you,
you.
Pam. Thank you. Will be some, after we finish this, I'll let Shay make a couple of comments on some things he's been working on. Okay. Mr. Parsons, Rick Parsons. Good evening, Rick. If you would, just state your name and your address, if you would, please.
Good evening. My name's Rick Parsons. I live at 1577 Green Hill Road. I prepared a very short presentation. Was told I need to keep this brief, so I would like to come back and put more of this on the agenda when we can discuss this rationally, not just as a Band-Aid at an intersection or a speeding problem, et cetera. But this is Green Hill Road, coming from the Parkway to the north, running to 321. It's clearly, as characterized by this, sort of divided in two parts. To the south is a very curvy part. Speeding does exceed the posted signs, speed limit at that point, but it's not the same chronic problem that we have as you come off the Parkway, moving through these two straight sections, which equate to about half of the total length of Green Hill Road. As I said, all of the road suffers from a speeding problem, but the area from Wonderland, coming off the Parkway to Wonderland and then to the sharp curve, speeds are in excess of 50 miles an hour that have been recorded. It's just simply not acceptable, but it's not the only problem. We've had a series of traffic studies. The city's been proactive. Thank you. As the previous speaker said, there's some problems with these studies. They weren't conducted during a peak season, but nonetheless, they did show that there was a speeding problem. And we'll do half full, half empty, but for us, the glass is half empty. Over 50% of the speeds recorded were in excess of the posted speed. Now, not all of them were excessive, but nonetheless, more than half of the people were going faster than the posted speed limit. The DOT recommendations, of course, did not address the chronic speeding issue in part of their decision. And in no way were these recent studies representative of the problems that we have with speeding. And so why do I say that? I say that because of a study that was conducted in 2017. The study had trip counters placed on Green Hill Road about where Wonderland comes out. There was no sign indicating speed of the car traveling in either direction. So I believe personally that that made a big difference. What do I mean by a difference? Well, this is a traffic report of a 24-hour period over a 2-week period indicated by the hour of the day. These are 1-hour increments. And what I've highlighted in yellow are speeds, maximum speeds recorded in this section of the road. The yellows are 10 miles above the posted speed limit at this time, and the red ones are circled were 15 miles per hour over the posted speed limit time. So not everyone was doing that speed, but there were maximum speeds recorded at that time, 15 miles per hour in excess of the posted speed limit. This is a problem. It's not safe, and enforcement alone is not going to solve the problem. Unless you have a policeman there 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, this will continue unless you address it in some other way possible. So, a little small, even hard for me to read. It just summarizes the problem, but nonetheless says if speed humps aren't an issue, enforcement's not going to solve this problem, and the one solution we're left with is probably more than likely stop signs along the road.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for taking your time, Rick. And thank you, Pam. Lee Rockamora.
I'm Lee Rockamora, 412 Laurel Park Road. I just want to congratulate the council on a informative and successful retreat this year. But mostly I want to thank you for making it accessible for me and for other citizens in this community who wanted to be a part of it. So thank you.
You've got 2 minutes, and thank you, Lee. Thank you. Mr. Fox had, yes, the traffic issue has been mentioned numerous times. And so, Mr. Fox, if you would like to tell us what you have thought about on the Green Hill situation.
I think the word traffic study or the phrase traffic study was used. We have not, I don't think anywhere in town that I'm aware of, had a third party take a look at a particular road from a traffic study standpoint. If so, then I'm not aware of it. I don't think that's taken place on Green Hill. DOT did take a look at Green Hill from the Wonderland Drive to the Parkway area. That's the DOT section. Everything from Wonderland Drive to 321 is town maintained. The DOT did obviously weigh in and put together their recommendations for Wonderland Drive. What the town has performed over the last what we have not done, like I said, is reached out to a third party. High Country Council of Governments has a transportation engineer, David Graham, that I've reached out to in the last few days and asked David to give some thoughts to weighing in of what could take place in the way of a traffic study. He's going to get back to me as soon as possible once he speaks with the planning director for the High Country Council of Governments. And then we've reached out as of today to Ramey Kemp and Associates out of Charlotte, I think in Raleigh, transportation engineers, given them a call and asked them if they would put together a proposal of what it may look like to look at all of Green Hill. And so what we've asked of both those entities is to look at Green Hill as a whole and give us some estimates of what that may look like from a study standpoint. So that's where we are currently with that. And internally, like I said, speed data, crash data is what we've been able to accumulate. DOT obviously weighed in on their section, which is really Wonderland to the Parkway. And so now I think a third party may be something we want to look into as being an option.
Okay. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for speaking. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Shane. Okay, moving forward. 2020 retreat recap. Mr. Fox.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. As Mr. Rockamore did state, we obviously conducted our winter retreat January the 6th through the 8th here at Brom. So tonight I'm here just to give the public a recap of really what we did over those 3 days, and then a quick top 10 list that we were able to accumulate based on our prioritization setting. So first slide, first of all, thank you to Brom. Brom hosted the council for 3 days, did a tremendous job, so could not thank Brom and Lee Carroll obviously more for what they did. Opened up on a day in which they normally weren't open. They publicly for allowing us to conduct the retreat there. I put 25 hours, 25 topics. I don't know if you know that. We had 25 topics on the agenda. We spent 25 hours of real time discussing those 25 topics. I say that because that's a tremendous amount of effort. That doesn't include the lunches and the dinners. That's real time that we spent talking about real topics. And so we were able to take those 25 topics and narrow that down to a top 10 we'll talk about just in a few moments. All departments represented. I thought that was a fantastic thing. I'm not sure what's happened in the past, but all of our departments were represented during the retreat process by way of presentations in their particular areas, and I thought that was a tremendous thing that was included and very appreciative from the council to allow that to take place. And our top 10 list, we'll go through that in just a few moments. Kind of looked at it from a short-term and long-term option. The first thing we did, and I'll go through this pretty quickly, we went through the 2019 in review. A few things up here. Sunset Streetscape project, we had the ribbon cutting today. That's a $2.3 million project that was completed on time and on budget, a tremendous project. Bass Lake Sidewalk project is undergoing right now on its way. We've got bids being accepted this month, and we have that bid opening at the end of the month, and we hope to break ground in the spring on that project. So another big accomplishment in 2019. Debt and bond issuance, I know I made the statement, and Ms. Norman made the statement a couple months ago of our bond issuance that took place, or actually last month in December, and that was very telling of the work that's been done over a number of years by the council, and the fact that we received arguably one of the lowest rates, 20-year rates that's ever been issued in North Carolina at 1.9%. So I think that's a testament to the work that's been done for a number of years. And then 321 project, we gave an update of the 321 project. The landscaping is essentially complete at this point. I think the numbers were staggering to most. Over 700 trees have been planted and 7,000 perennials. So over 7,000 plants have been planted along that road. We gave a public thank you to a local citizen, David Goodson, who had participated voluntarily, free of charge, and has spent a tremendous amount of time, I would guess, into the hundreds of hours in helping our staff, along with Piedmont and DOT, and getting a better understanding of what that landscape looks like and that contract that DOT ultimately awarded to Piedmont. So we publicly thank David for all the hard work that he's put in and continues to put in. So again, make that statement publicly. So we started the retreat with a 2019 review. There were some other topics up there that we reviewed, but we essentially started with our January 19 retreat top 7 or 8 list, and we went through those and gave an update. And so these are just a few of those items that we gave an update on to a lot of accomplishments that took place in 2019. And then the next big section was our financial section, and I think that's important because it really sets the stage for what we were getting ready to go into. You know, it's obviously extremely important to understand where you are currently with the mid-year review, but it's also important to go back and do a history lesson of the items that you've talked about and budgeted for in the past in the way of reserves. We went through and looked at our fund balance history and where we've kind of made some changes along that line. We looked at our fund balance policy and the fact that we're a little bit above that and what that would mean for some potential one-time capital. And then we talked about some new year or next year budget items. And then we talked a decent amount about our water rates and the fact that our water rates right now are pretty standard. We have one rate for residential and commercial, and the fact that we don't know what we're going to get to, but we know that we've got some work to look into, and there's some work to get started to look into, maybe some options there from the water rate standpoint. We know we've got some long-term capital that we put on our top 10 list, and we need to look at a fair and balanced way of structuring our water rates and our sewer rates, essentially, that can help us plan not only for for the next couple of years, but for the next 20 years. And so we spent a good amount of time talking about the financial ramifications of what that may look like. So after we did the review of 2019 and the financial, we dove into, and then we went into the board appointments. So the reason I put that up here, one of the priorities last year was to have an increase in board applications, and I think that was successful. We had 18 applications, or 19 actually. We had 19 applications, 18 that qualified for 10 positions. We had I think we had 8 for TDA for 1 position. So I think that's a testament to the fact that it was put on last year's prioritization list, and I think this is obviously showing the dividends of some of that work that we put in. But we had 18 applications for 10 seats, and that'll be before you at the February meeting. And so those decisions will be made at the February meeting, obviously not tonight's. And so from there, we really did dive into the 3 days worth, 25 hours worth of data or information to start making a determination of what our top 10 list would look like. It may be a little difficult to see, but ultimately we went through after we decided, after we finished up talking about 25 topics, we went through and put a list together, 5 being obviously our highest, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, of all the topics that we talked about. So starting from the top, I'll just a brief, this is my last slide, so just a brief explanation of a few things here. Our PRVs, our pressure reducing valves, in the town of Blowing Rock, our water system is gravity fed. There's about 24 PRVs that the town owns and maintains throughout the water system that helps reduce that pressure as it comes downhill, essentially. Those were put in the 60s and 70s, and so they're in need of replacement. So one of the things we talked about is how could we phase those in over a period of time. Total cost about $1.2 million, obviously, but not in 1 year. That can be spread out over a number of years as we replace those. We put the word vault up there. Those are in very cramped spaces right now, and so one of the things that we're looking to do as we replace them and become more efficient is to build vaults that are more accessible, so our folks can go in and clean them and maintain them and hopefully get a better useful life out of them. So that ended up rising to a 5 level. Another thing that we talked about was our playground replacement. Last month, we had a presentation that was done by a couple folks within the community in regards to our Memorial Park playground. And so just this past year, our tot playground, or our small playground, was removed because of deterioration. Our larger playground that's still there, still operational, is made out of the same material. So we know that we need to have a plan in place to replace that. And so we spoke to that regard of what that would look like, and put a cost estimate out there of $600,000 of what we think that's going to be. And then we also spoke to the fact that we would like for a couple individuals from the public to join with our town staff, and at least one other individual from our town staff, our landscaping and park, and then one other individual from our town staff, to put together somewhat of a committee of maybe some options to bring before council. And so that's something that's coming up soon. Hopefully we'll have some options of what some playgrounds may look like, and some cost obviously with that. So that was given a 5. Third, Sunset North-South Main landscaping was brought up and discussed of what those 3 areas may look like. I know Sunset Gateway Project, something that's been talked about within the town, but also brought in North and South Main and trying to get a uniform look there potentially. And so that was a project that was given a 5. Our last one that was given a 5 was sidewalks. We put North Main and Clark Street. That conversation began by an understanding of our 2014 bond issuance that took place. We have phase 4 left, so we've had 3 phases, just completed phase 3, which was mainly Sunset and paving. Our 4th issuance that was approved in 2014 has some money set aside for sidewalks. Originally, those monies were set aside for Bass Lake. The fortunate part is that over the course of the last several years, we were able to attain an EFLAP grant to pay for the majority, 80% of the Bass Lake project. So we know there's going to be some available monies for sidewalks. And so the council went through and we looked at some different areas in town that may be a priority in the way of adding sidewalks. North Main and Clark Street were the 2 streets that came up by council as being areas. North Main, I think really over Clark Street being first and foremost, given the fact that we've got some development that's going on in that area. We also have the Middle Fork Greenway with the trailhead just outside of Chatola, and we have the Bass Lake Sidewalk project we mentioned just a few minutes ago. So connectivity of Middle Fork and Bass Lake was something that we discussed quite a bit, and so that's why North Main was on there, and then Clark Street kind of came in, I guess, a second at this point as potential need with adding sidewalks from Devant Field up to the pool or the 221 area. Again, providing potential connectivity to the 221 Bass Lake sidewalk. And then a few more things. We went into all things planning and code related on Monday afternoon. We identified some areas here that we know that we need to have some discussions. Ultimately, between the council and the planning board and staff, those discussions will be had. Some of those areas with regards to green space, downtown design, the parking credit, short-term rentals, 28-day potential loophole, and then we had a discussion about CUP versus conditional zoning. So we spent a good amount of time on Monday talking all things planning and zoning related. AMR and AMI upgrades, water meters. So right now we have in the town about 2,400 water meters that I would consider basic water meters that's got the gauge on them. We have folks that go out and spend a good amount of time reading those meters. So we spent about 3 full days with several crews reading those meters each time we read them. We have rereads and things of that nature that take place because it is obviously a digital gauge that we're reading off of that. So we talked about a couple of different options of things that are out there in regards to advancement with the meters. And so that conversation led to, again, something along the lines of what potentially would be considered a phased-in approach over several years of what that would look like. Again, kind of like with the vaults and the pressure-reducing valves, that conversation led back to really a need to get a better understanding of what our water rate structure looks like. And so we began that process this week. We actually began that today with a couple folks taking a look at our water rates and starting to dive in and giving us some thoughts of what we may need to be looking at there. So, but conversation on water meters and the need to upgrade water meters. AMR allows you to drive by and get the reading in a vehicle, trash truck, whatever the case may be. AMI allows you obviously full access from anywhere in the world. So it's using technology that anyone can pull up. Homeowners have that ability, but we'd obviously have that ability here. So we wouldn't have folks physically going out and reading meters at that point. We'd have the ability to pull that data every 24 hours. And so we broke down the discussion and the options of what those two would look like. Legion Hill project, I don't know if that's a proper term, but a parkway connector. Village Foundation had approached myself recently on an idea that they would like to take on a project in the location of Legion, the Legion building on the backside of that, the hill, and provide several aspects that we don't currently have, one being updated steps. Right now we have some steps that are deteriorating as it goes down to Broyhill Lake. A second would be ADA access, a boardwalk that would provide access, ADA access that we don't currently have, and then some other features. And so we discussed that project as being something, one that was identified in the Virginia Tech Plan as being something that the council really saw a need for, and then others in kind of the time frame of what that may look like. But again, that one's a little bit different with the Village Foundation, essentially at this point taking the reins on that project. Plans are right now to bring that before the council in February, conceptually at this point, to give some ideas of kind of where to go from there, of what that may look like. Last few areas, Broyhill Lake, the dam, really we're talking the spillway there. We've got a meeting tomorrow scheduled with McGill to take a look at that area to get a better understanding. That lake and that spillway are quite aged, and so we want to get an understanding of before we start putting money into repairing the spillway, as it starts to deteriorate in places. We want to take a look and see if there's options out there that may be better suited for the water itself. And so that was something that was brought up as being a top 10. And then the last two, crosswalks at 221 in Main. So really those are two different intersections. It's Main Street and Sunset was I guess priority number one, and then Main and 221. So conversations with DOT really leads to two options there. You have the pedestal option that you see we have out on 321. You also see the large black mast arm option that holds the stoplights and the crossing itself. And so we had a good discussion along the lines of those two options. And so I'll bring back to the council those two options, some renderings and some real cost numbers of what that's going to look like. And then the last thing was all things parking. We had a good parking discussion on Tuesday afternoon of trying to get a better understanding of where our parking problems exist. We know we have what I would call a parking management issue. We have parking spaces sometimes that aren't utilized. We have folks in town that don't know where those are located. We have a number of things that we know we need to get a better handle on in regards to parking. And so that conversation I thought was a great conversation of getting a better feel and a better understanding of what we have in the way of inventory and how are we using that inventory right now. Does it lead to additional inventory? We don't know at this point. Really was a discussion. Let's get our arms and our hands around what we currently have and how we're utilizing that. Not only through the week, but on busy weekends. You know, what are we doing in the way of enforcement? What are we doing in the way of getting a better understanding of how we're allowing the accessibility for our citizens? So those were our top 10 items. I know that's kind of quick, but I wanted just to give a brief overview for the public. I know it's been out there. A couple things that I'll make quick comments to. I know there was some news stories that were ran in the way of paid parking. That was a brief conversation. I think WSCC may have made a comment that we were looking at paid parking. We did discuss paid parking. I would say with parking, all things are on the table at this point. I don't think anything was just taking off the table. It's trying to take a fresh approach to what we have. Starting with what we have, literally what we have, number of spaces, locations, private, public, that type of thing. We have that data, so let's get that comprised and take a look at that, and then begin from there. So we haven't made any decisions in regards to parking. And then we did some really granular data of our park, the number of folks that attend our park. We have great technology, great access points for Wi-Fi all throughout town that are able to connect and count phones or pings off of cell phones. And so we gave some numbers there that I think were maybe misinterpreted a little bit by some of the things that were out there. Essentially, as we count the number of cars in town, that's what we were doing. So we don't necessarily know exactly how many folks are in a certain area for a certain amount of time, but we know how many people are in town at any given time, and so we made that comment. So just want to give clarification that those numbers that we gave are people in town and people in the park area. They weren't necessarily folks sitting in the park, but they were people within the park. So be glad to answer any questions, I know, or maybe clarify anything that I just said for the public.
I'm
Okay.
excited. I think we have a roadmap for where we're going, which is much better than we have in years past. And it helps us stay focused and get other partners in the community to see how we're all focused and can work together to get these things done in a timely manner. Thank you.
Shane, I want to thank you and the department heads and staff on the preparation and execution of the retreat. We talked about a lot of things, and you guys kept us on task and focused, and I think it was very successful. So thank you for that.
And I would say thank you, publicly to everyone on council. 25 hours, 25 topics is a lot to take on. I know that's a tremendous amount of items, a heavy lift. So thank you for being willing to sit there and stay awake and listen and pay attention and participate. So we're grateful. Staff is grateful at the dedication that you showed. So thank you for that.
All right, moving forward, we have the ad hoc 321 visioning process. This was done by the ad hoc committee that worked tirelessly and did a good job, and then brought on Benchmark, and so Mr. Kevin Rothrock.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, I'm just going to be very brief. I just want to say that the Land Use Ad Hoc Committee has finished its work. It's completed its study of 321 Valley Boulevard with the assistance of Benchmark Planning, and has presented to you the final report and implementation strategies for creating a vision for the corridor. So Jason is here tonight. He's going to go through a brief presentation. And so that gives you the opportunity to review the study, the final recommendations. And at that time, you can provide direction back to the ad hoc committee, or you can provide it to planning board, whichever way you'd like to, for if there needs to be any further action. So Jason's going to come up, and then we'll both be here to answer any questions in summary. Thank you.
Thanks for coming up, Jason.
Mayor, members of council, thank you for having me, and you're off to a great new year. 2020 has a lot in store for you, as I can tell, so hopefully we're going to add one more item to your plate. This is the summary of the study that we completed with the ad hoc committee. I think most of you are aware, and were involved in a lot of the meetings that we held. Just to recap quickly, spring of 2019, the ad hoc committee came together, sent out a request for proposal, selected our firm to work with. We began that around September of this past year. We reviewed the existing land uses. We worked to gather public input at 2 public meetings to help develop a vision for the corridor and recommendations. Just to recap, as you can see here, this is the study area moving from south to north, the Blowing Rock Furniture Gallery, all the way north to the Blue Ridge Parkway. As I had mentioned, we had 2 public meetings where we had live polling. If you were able to come to that, hopefully folks had fun doing that, because it's an anonymous way to provide feedback and instant feedback and have great discussion. We did that. Approximately 100 people attended over both nights that we held it. The main focus was looking at what has been the result of commercial development since the 1997 guidelines were adopted. And the big question was, how consistent has that development been with the town's vision? And what we discovered was that it was fairly consistent. Approximately 84% of those who attended indicated that they felt the vision was being achieved on Valley Boulevard. However, that doesn't mean it's perfect. There were several things that were noted during the public meetings. We took a lot of feedback to bring back information to the ad hoc committee. And some of the things that were brought out were potential need for modification to design requirements based on the feedback we were receiving, the review process, and permitted uses. So I'll go over the ordinance recommendations that came out of the public input meetings and working with the ad hoc committee. And I'll try to go over these fairly briefly. These were some of the issues described at the meetings. Smaller buildings desired. We showed lots of images. Folks felt like maybe some of the buildings were too tall, too big. You can see bulk and scale. Perhaps some of the colors allowed, maybe that needs to be fine-tuned a little bit. Building materials similar to the colors, really keep it minimal. Roof pitch, there's a lot of discussion about that, but ultimately no flat roofs, keeping the blow and rock pitched roof that's, blow and rock's become known for. Parking location, rear or side. Setbacks, there's a lot of discussion about some of the properties that have had, right-of-way taken away that has really limited the potential to develop certain properties along 321. So that was one thing that we looked at, was how can we have some flexibility for some of those properties. And then there was a lot of discussion, although it wasn't really the task of the study, there was a lot of discussion about best practices from an environmental standpoint and also Greenway. You can see this is one of the images from the slideshow. We had a lot of too much, no. Ordinance recommendations design. I'll start with creating a standalone district for Valley Boulevard. As you know, the design requirements include all commercial development, downtown and 321. And over the course of the study, there's some things that are different, obviously, between the character that you have in downtown versus out on 321. So that was one of the recommendations. Narrow the scope of the color palette. As I had mentioned, some of the colors might be a little bit too wide range for the taste of what folks would like to see as far as the vision for Blowing Rock along Valley Boulevard. That was one of the recommendations. Limiting exterior building materials to stone and also natural wood or equivalent. That seemed to be the preference that came out of the meetings. Of course, these are recommendations that will go forward to the planning board for their consideration, assuming that's where you go with it. Reduce maximum building height, since there was some concern about buildings being too tall, perhaps blocking views, that maybe there's some options that could exist. One of those options would be to reduce the height that you currently have, or for the deeper lots, perhaps they could have, with a greater setback, they could potentially have greater height. That was one of the things that the committee discussed, but felt maybe that's something the planning board could give some more thought to in their review. Reduce the required front setbacks, as I had mentioned. There are lots of properties that are constrained by the roadway widening project and improvements, and so there's a need, especially along the east side. There's some constraints, and perhaps there could be some better utilization of the properties that are along there. And there are some on the west side as well that face some constraints. And there's some really deep lots on the west side. And those are areas we talked about extending the greenways. You see the image here. This came from the comprehensive plan from 2014, the idea of pulling Middle Fork Greenway on up Valley Boulevard. And you see recommendation number 7, activate the greenway. So once you have a plan to extend the greenway, how can you work with potential property owners as they redevelop properties, as you see in the image? I guess, does this have a pointer? Yeah. Right here, you can see how development could potentially front the greenway to help activate that and provide an amenity for those businesses and folks that live here and come to visit Blowing Rock. Integrate stone walls, and here's, just in case you're wondering, this is back behind the barbecue, right adjacent to the hotels. Some pretty large areas that could potentially be, some significant development there. One thing that came out of the process was integrating some of the stone walls that you see throughout Blowing Rock into the landscape. This could be part of the process. This is just a before and after example. This is the outback. We talked a little bit about landscaping during the public presentations. Stone walls could also be used to help buffer and provide some screening of public parking areas. That's just one example of how that could be used. Ordinance recommendations, continuing, clarify natural landscape design. Seems to be a lot of desire to use natural, native landscaping materials better throughout the corridor. Limit roof-mounted mechanical equipment. You know, if you have pitched roof requirements, that makes it kind of difficult to have, mechanical equipment on the roof. You certainly can do that, but, the taller the building goes, the pitches of the roof, there's a lot of complications that can come with that. Just want to make sure you have clear guidance on how to do that. Require additional architectural elements. There may be some desire to have certain features have priority over others. Some sort of point system that might go into this to provide some clarity to someone who's building a building in Blowing Rock. They could have a point system, and then they know if they've met that, they could get their building built. And you could highlight things such as the stone stacked walls that we talked about. That could be something that would potentially gain property owners some additional points in the review process. So this is some of you may or may not appreciate this, especially the elected officials, but there's a lot of permission and for subjective modifications in several places in the ordinance. I know we all, would like to have a perfect world, and sometimes you can't remove everything to have some leeway in making decisions, but there's certainly some language that could be tightened up so that a developer has and a property owner has clarity on what is required, and they don't have to think, well, if I come to council with something, somebody's going to change their mind, and I've invested all this money into my project. So that's, there are some things that could be tightened up, and to do that, there's some language that could be amended to help with that as well. Ordinance recommendations. In fact, it should make your job easier, right? The less subjective it is, easier it is for you, planning board, and the community. Ordinance recommendations, permitted uses during the meetings, and also the ad hoc committee meetings as well as the public meetings. These were some of the uses that were brought up that were concerned to see, out there on your gateway into Blowing Rock. Supplemental recommendations. So those were all the kind of ordinance-related recommendations that we felt like the planning board should, the ad hoc committee, would like to see the planning board take guidance from the result of the public input and the work of the study. These are some additional recommendations. Some you're working on, like implementing the wayfinding, continuing to identify and acquire remnant parcels. There's a few left out there. Are there some that can be used for landscaping, public purposes, to help beautify Valley Boulevard, which is number 3. And then number 4, pursue private beautification efforts. There was a lot of discussion about existing properties and the potential of some sort of a grant program that you may be familiar with. A lot of downtown communities have programs where they will work with a property owner on matching grant, to help improve a facade or to do landscaping. And that's something that came out of the process as well. And finally, partner for stormwater management. There are a lot of existing properties out there. Of course, they're there. They're not going anywhere, but it seemed to be a concern raised in the public meetings about water quality and those types of things. So there is opportunity for the town to potentially partner with private property owners that have existing development to improve some of that stormwater management. This is one of the renderings that we did showing how the bank could be landscaped, and this is also showing the stacked rock wall. And this was a Photoshop rendering, and this wall was actually a picture from Cone Manor, so it's local. And this is an example of what the land is actually out there now. It wasn't out there when we did the rendering. You can see here on both sides where we've kind of incorporated the rock wall so you can see that. Implementation, so it's great. I think the committee did a lot of great work on this study. But as you know, sitting in your seat, so what? What do we do with it now? How do we move this forward? And you see for 2020, you've already got a pretty full agenda. But I think to implement this study, some of the main steps, obviously getting the planning board involved, in the ordinance recommendations that we went over. There's a lot of detail, although there's some direction for the vision that's been established. Working that out in ordinance format is another task, because you have to, make sure the statutes are being followed, and it takes a little bit more work and detail to get to that point. So the planning board will hopefully be able to take the results of this study and make amendments to the land use code proposed and bring those back to you at some point, maybe in 2020. It's a lot of work. Staff and council should engage NCDOT to discuss additional public space and beautification opportunities. DOT has worked with communities and will provide easements on properties, when there's a clear purpose and you come to them with a clear plan to say, we'd like to maintain some landscaping here, and maybe even have some partnerships like that now with NCDOT. And so looking at some of those banks that were shown in the pictures earlier, and looking at other places where you could beautify 321 Valley Boulevard as the gateway. It's great to talk about Middle Fork Greenway, bringing that into town, but until you have a plan to do that, it's just a pretty picture up on the wall, and if someone wants to develop their property, they really have no guidance unless you have something, policy set forth that expresses your desires to see that greenway extended further up Valley Boulevard. So this is an opportunity to also look at ways to improve stormwater management in that area of the corridor as well. So that's what we recommended. What's it going to take to implement it? A lot of question marks, and until you really dig into the details, it's hard to have a clear answer on what that's exactly going to take. Town staff and planning board examine ways to improve water quality. The town has very good stormwater management ordinances and regulations. But it was pointed out, through the watershed management plan is recently completed and other citizen input, that they would like to see an emphasis on water quality. Obviously, stormwater management's about water quality, but there's some additional measures that could be taken to improve water quality. And then finally is the, taking some of these legacy sites, these pre-existing developments. Is there a potential program that town could get behind, partner with a local nonprofit to develop a matching grant to improve some of the facades along 321 and perhaps improve some of the landscaping. So those are the 5 key implementation items that came out of the study. Once again, some of these were maybe a little bit additional than what the ad hoc committee, I think, was really focused on. Let's get these recommendations to the planning board about the ordinance. I think during the process, there were some additional things that came out as a result. So that's the presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to thank the committee who put in a lot of time. Publicly, Al Yant, John Aldridge, Aaron Dixon, Joe Bogdan, Pete Carini, Kevin, and myself. And thank you, Jason, for all your help. Your staff was excellent. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you guys for, when you gave us the deadline of coming back here on the 14th, I thought that was a little cutting it close. But so thank you for being available to meet to make this happen.
I think you all did a great job, and I think at this point, correct me if I'm mistaken, would it not be the proper procedure to send this on to the planning board and say, okay, it's in your lap, come up with some ideas for modifications or changes and bring it back to us? What do you think?
I think it's great. I don't know if we need a formal
Don't need a motion.
No, okay.
Let's give clear direction.
Well, we did. That was one of the things that we, I think, as a group had been, as a council, have been criticized. We didn't. So Jason, if in here, you've just been handed this, there are directions on which codes need to be changed. We actually put whose job, whether it was staff and council, planning board. But what page is it on, Jason?
That would be on page 31 at near the, I guess, the middle, if you've got the
We really
full
broke it
packet.
down because we thought that was important.
You were on planning for a good while, David.
Go to 31.
do you have some additional thoughts on that?
You have it printed, Dave.
It's in your,
It's right here.
That's out.
oh,
I'm not reaching over there.
we didn't, do you want to see this?
I did look at this.
Okay.
I guess my point is that, and that is good, that we need to emphasize that in a timeline, when we would like things back.
Okay. What do you think for a timeline?
You think we should do that or plan on it?
Why don't we send it to
I don't know
planning
what's on.
and request,
I don't know what's on their agenda and their capacity is.
why don't we send it to them and request an update and say 2 months?
Well, and we could ask them for the timeline,
Yeah.
because I think there's some
Yeah.
things in here that aren't gonna be that hard to do, but there's some that's gonna require them to delve in and do a
Okay.
little bit more work. And we thought winter, one of the reasons that we really pushed, Jason's group was that winter is the time when we don't have a lot of development and they may not be as tied up.
So you think send it to planning and then have them come back with what their timeline looks like? What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, we're prepared to meet Thursday night and we just left it open discussion. And then they're not gonna take any action.
Right.
Publish the agenda to that effect. But we can take the full-on report to them, give us some time. We're in limbo.
Right.
We've got new.
You got a transition.
That'll be on. So we'll probably want everybody on board to set subcommittees like we normally do in March. But there's some things that we can start, do some work on now. And some things that came out of the retreat that we can start focusing on as well, in addition to that.
How about if we request Kevin give us an update March meeting?
Well, March is, we're not gonna appoint until February, so
That's
March
right.
will be your first meeting with,
March will be my first meeting with the new.
With the new board?
how about
Yes, that'd be
April? Can we do
Yeah.
April?
Yeah, that'd be April. Okay, is that good? Y'all, everybody good with that?
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah. Okay.
And then there's staff recommendations on in here too.
Yeah, this is good. On page 24, it shows, it
Would you like to-
links everything to specific sections
Yeah,
in the existing
right.
Okay.
codes for modification.
Right.
All right. Very good. Great job. I think that it's an important part of our community now. Gosh, everybody thanks you.
Thank you, and happy 2020.
Thanks, thank you, Jason.
All right, moving forward. Oh, wow. Official reports and comments. Well, I guess that starts with me. The only thing I can say, and I know, and my hat's off to Deanna Ballard and Virginia Powell and many others for pushing and pushing and pushing. But I want you to know, today, the lines are down off the majority of poles, and Blue Ridge is going to be taking them down. Shane talked to me, he says, Blue Ridge didn't know that the lines were coming down. So the poles on Valley Boulevard will be removed, possibly as early as this week.
Yay.
So
Thank you, Virginia. You pushed on that one.
you took pictures.
If anybody didn't believe me, I took pictures
Did you?
right there at Tanger across the road.
Yeah.
Does that mean the U.S. Ensign will fly at the fire department?
That is correct. So I did speak to Chief Graham today about the landscaping, so that will move forward just as soon as that pole is removed.
Great.
Albert, any comments?
One of the better things I thought that came out of the retreat was this parking study to see what our inventory is, because we may think we know the inventory. We have several people in town that contact me on a regular basis that think they know, but actually nobody knows. I don't know how we can do anything unless we have a parking inventory. How many places, or some of them being stolen from the town, concealed, whatever. So that's a very important thing, because I hear parking just about more than I hear anything in this town.
Very good. Dave?
I just, as I already said, I wanted to publicly say thank you to the Shane and the town staff for all the work they did. the retreat was very enlightening for me. It was my first retreat. And by my notes, we covered about 140 different items and 25 topics. And I'm not exaggerating. I went back and looked at my notes. Your town council worked very hard at the retreat, and I'm very encouraged about the direction that we have for this year and the things that we are looking at. There'll be other things that obviously come up during the course of the year, but it was a very good retreat, and I'm excited about our top 10 list.
Want to thank Mr. Fox and staff. One of the things that I liked having at Abram was that if we had a question, we could turn around and ask the staff, and they could answer it right there, and that was helpful. Saved us time from having to come back and do that, so I really appreciate it. Staff did a great job. Mr. Fox did, and thank you.
I also want to thank Brom especially for everything that they did. That was great. Only thing I really have is, we're working right now on finalizing a route on the shuttle.
Route on the shuttle.
The shuttle.
Again, it was great to have the retreat here. I think we'll swallow it and think about if it worked well for us to be here or if we should go away. I appreciate testing it out as having it in town. It's nice to be in such a small town where when things like snow days happen during a retreat, a mom can manage her life and still be a council member and fully engaged. And so that was a benefit for me. I don't know how I would have managed that from Asheville. So, I don't think Hillary gets enough credit. She actually, as the days went by, we had more fabulous little candy bowls in front of us and treats and stuff to keep us going. And so thank you for all the little details and getting us local coffee and local people to provide all of our food and nourishment, and those little things go a long way, guys, when we're sitting there for a long time. But it was great to have David on board and hear how he's going to be a great part of our new team. And I'm just, like I said before, really excited to have a path and it mapped out, and really excited to get everybody in town on board on how we can all work together to achieve our goals. It's hard to move this big ship, and if we're all working together, it makes it a lot easier and we can move faster. So it'll help with a lot of the frustration that I know that the citizens have. They're like, gosh, why does this take so long? But with a clear map, we can do it. So I appreciate that.
Mr. Mosley.
Hillary had one,
As usual.
Hillary had one slight little failure. She forgot where to buy Tootsie Rolls.
Oh, I did forget the Tootsie Rolls. I thought you were going to talk about the goldfish. Yeah, the goldfish.
That doesn't take the place of it. Bad substitute.
Mr. Fox.
Just a couple dates coming up. Planning board is this Thursday at 7, so that not 5:30, but 7 p.m. Board of Adjustments is planning on meeting on the 23rd at 5:30. And then Winterfest is the 23rd through the 26th. So just a few things coming up during the month of January. Just wanted to make note of that. Other than that, again, just thank you for your willingness and time and effort last week. I think it was a tremendous success, in my opinion, of all the things we were able to talk about and able to come together and put together, I think, a wonderful list of items that are definitely needed, and we've got a plan now to move forward with. So thank you again.
Is the apartment appeal sit on the agenda for this Thursday?
Board of Adjustments,
Board of
23rd.
Adjustments, yeah.
23rd,
23rd.
Okay.
5:30.
Okay, I would like to reiterate what everybody said. Thank you so much to town department heads. Thank you to Shane. Thank you for the citizens that did come to our retreat. I felt like we did accomplish a lot, and you got a great council, and we got great citizens. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will be going into closed session here in just a few minutes. We'll take about a 10-minute break to let everybody get everything in order, and then we'll come back into session and then go into closed session.
Hey Doug, there were candy bars.